Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Yes, it's Spiritual Talk TV. Glad you can join us. Don't forget, if you love the content on the channel, don't forget to subscribe. We really appreciate your support. Also, if you ring the bell, you'll get notifications. So just subscribe, the little button down there. That'll be great. Anyway, on with the show, guys. We've got another great guest. Tonight, we have international medium, Kat Baillie. I'm just going to bring you in. Hi, Kat.
Hi, Paul.
Thank you for joining us. It's a real privilege to interview you tonight. I know you're a very busy person. How did you start into mediumship?
That's a really good question. I actually had a diving accident. I was working in the UK fashion industry at the time, and I was very happy in my fashion career as a buying manager and head of buying. And I had an accident in Ibiza, and that accident was like a near death, but I didn't actually cross over. I had a moment in the water where I thought I was going to die, and it's really interesting because I'm not religious, but in that moment, there was this beautiful sense of peace. And I'd always been a bit scared or nervous about death. And in this moment, it felt very, very tranquil. And I think that's kind of good for all the listeners to know, actually. In that moment, it was just very, very peaceful. And I just got engaged to get married to my partner, Stuart, and I was desperate to get married. And so I kind of thought it was kind of a quirky, I don't know, like a quirky sense of humor was like, are you kidding me? Just to get married. And I'm about to die in this water. And I waited 8 years to get married.
What?
And I just got engaged. And I was like, you are kidding me. You can't take me now. So I kind of started partitioning the spirit world, if you will. I actually said the Lord's Prayer. It was the only thing that I could remember from school. And I said, thank you. If this is the end of my life, then I just want to say I've had a great life up until now. But there's just one thing I really like. I really like to get married. And at that moment, Paul, that's when I had an awareness that there was something else going on. I felt a presence in the water. I couldn't see anything. But there was like a wave of energy. It almost looked like steam from a steam kettle. The energy or the sort of environment around me looked a bit warped. It didn't look physical in the way that it normally does. And this film sort of moved towards me. But as I said the prayer, it retracted back. And that was my first awareness that there was something else going on. It responded intelligently to my request. And at this exact moment, the diving instructor, realizing what had happened, came to the surface sort of 20 minutes later. But by that point, I was suffering from overexertion. And I'd been a lifeguard in my earlier days at college, so I was a good swimmer, but I was close to rocks and I was scared to inflate the VCD for fear I went into the rocks, which I knew took more people over in my hometown than actually the actual water itself, because with the kind of motion of the waves, you can get hit against the rocks. So I was suffering from overexertion with these big tanks on my back, and as she came up, I blacked out. And I guess I was curious. I kind of wanted to understand what had happened, but I kind of went through the motions of getting myself back to sort of normality. And it was only when I had got married, Spirit were clever, they waited till I got married so my husband couldn't run away. But I was still having some kind of issues connected to the diving accident. So a friend of mine recommended that I did a course of massages, and I'm not somebody who normally pampers myself or goes for treatments like that, but I did a course of 6, hoping that it would take the tension out of the body. And on the last day, there was a gentleman that basically the normal masseur had his car broke down, like one of these random synchronicities. And as I went into the room that day, I had this real soul recognition of the person that was replacing him. And it's really strange. I've never met him in life before, but in that moment, I felt like I knew him. It was really strange. And then every other sentence that we said, we had a synchronicity. I'd just come back from India. He'd just come back from India. His grandfather was a farmer. My grandfather was a farmer. When we started talking about what kind of farming, it was the same type of farming. And so we went through half an hour of this. And it was only kind of when I turned over to sort of like, as you do, kind of nervously, and the young man said to me, "You've got a blockage of energy in your lower back. You've had an accident." I said, "I have, but I haven't told anybody here. How do you know?" He said, "I can see it." I said, "What do you mean you can see it?" He said, "I know that you had a diving accident." I said, "Well, that's very specific." Like, how can you see that I had a diving accident? He said, "I just know it." And I was like, part of me was very curious. I wasn't spiritual. So I was like, have I got a label that's on my head that says diving accident person walking here? Like, where do you see it? I started to look around. I wasn't being sarcastic. I was just, my giddy sense of humor, if you will, was kind of like, where do you see it? Like, how? And he said, "I just see it mind's eye." But he was an aura reader. He had a really interesting background. He'd had an interesting journey, and he was trained in Reiki and osteopathy. And so he said to me, "I'm going to take a risk. I shouldn't really show you what I'm about to show you here. It's a very corporate environment. But if you give me your permission, I will show you something, because I'm scared that if you walk out of here today, it could turn, this blockage of energy could turn to disease or cancer in your body. And I want to release that for you or give you an experience." Now, what he did next, he took kind of a risk. And I guess his enthusiasm and my curiosity created then a situation which would later cause Kundalini rising. So what happened was he did some manipulation to the neck with cranial sacral osteopathy, and then he did some Reiki, and he didn't actually touch my body at this point, but he put his hands behind my neck, and it felt like a bolt of light went right through my neck all the way down through my body. And I was like, "Whoa, what was that?" And then he had switches up, and he put his hand to my lower back, and then at my lower sacrum to start with, actually. And my whole body started convulsing like a snake. I literally I couldn't control the motion. It was that forceful. And then he put his hand towards my lower back, and my whole body started to convulse. At which point I burst out crying, like uncontrollably. I mean, this wasn't just like sobbing, it was literally screaming. Um, and I just couldn't stop crying. I had mascara everywhere, and I was kind of really embarrassed. But he was just very encouraging and was kind of, "Well, that's just the shock of the diving accident coming out." But what we didn't know is that he triggered Kundalini rising. So within the next few days, Paul, what started to happen is I started to have visions, and I started to see and hear and feel things. And so my awakening, if you will, was very scary. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I was absolutely petrified. I thought I was having a nervous breakdown. And by night two, for somebody who doesn't even believe in angels, I started to have angelic experiences. I started to see visions, like screens coming out, and people interacting and talking to me with my eyes open when I'm wide awake. And they were responding and giving me evidential information. And so the internet had only really just come out at the time. So I started to research and look at the information that was given to me. And when I realized the stuff, which was very unusual information, checked out, that's when I realized there's something else going on. But I was still scared, and I didn't really know who to contact. So I kind of signed myself off work for a couple of weeks, decided that I would give myself a break just in case I was suffering from overexhaustion or something. And I would follow messages that I received, and that's what I did. And I followed them to a town that I'd never been to before. And I was told to get postcards, black and white postcards that would have a hay bale on it. They told me that it would have the name Sutcliffe on it. And I ended up in a town that I've never been to. I found the postcards that had the photographer Frank Meadow Sutcliffe on it. And it had pictures of they had a hay bale on front of it. It had pictures of my family 3 generations back, which we never knew existed. And from this image, I then was directed to an art gallery where 20% of the photographs in this art gallery were photographs of my family. And again, we'd lived in the Shire, if you will, or the county for many, many, years, and nobody knew these photos existed. So that was the moment when I was like, wow, there's something real to this.
Just to go back, just for people that are watching and might not understand what a Kundalini experience or Kundalini
Okay.
rise.
A lot of people will navigate through yoga and transcendent meditation,
Yeah,
an energy release in the body called Kundalini. And Kundalini is a sacred energy that can vibrate through the body, and as it moves up and gets more powerful through the body, we have these kind of energy channels that people call chakras. It blasts through each of those centers. If there's a block, you're in trouble, because if there's a block, it will burn or cause problems, because the force of energy is so strong. You know, one girl actually did get sent to me because she burnt her throat by doing transacral meditation without a real tutor or somebody. So I sort of say to everybody, be very careful, make sure that you've got somebody who's qualified and understands what they're working with, because Kundalini energy is very powerful. It's like an energy that surges up through these chakras. And for me, it started by opening at the heart, but 11 years later, they opened up the throat. So Kundalini rising is a 3-stage process, from what I understand. They open up the heart first, then the throat, and then if you're really lucky, you may get the pineal gland to open, which is what they call enlightenment, but that might not happen in this incarnation. It may happen if you're open to other future incarnations, it may happen at a different stage. So it's a very powerful energy that, when it really hits, connects you to the source energy, and you can get knowledge and information that is almost transmitted and downloaded to you at a very rapid rate, which is what happened to me. But that information had an evidential quality to it. And it also had some very beautiful visions and conversations with guides that I found I was mesmerized with. I remember one day a beautiful scene opened up in front of me of a water and light reflecting off the water. And this very angelic woman's voice said to me, all you have to do is reflect. Your body is actually 65% water, but all you have to do is reflect back the light of spirit, my light, as it reflects on your waters. And I think that is most profoundest, is probably the most beautiful explanation of mediumship I've ever heard. And it was just this lovely concept that this woman wanted just to reflect her light on my energy, on my water, being the water of the body. And you know, one of my other guides, as I got to know him later, he says he calls it rising the pool. rise the pond, the water, in order to create connections. So Kundalini is a very strong, powerful energy that lots of people spend years trying to cultivate, and it can be opened accidentally in an accident. We call it psychic evacuation, or kind of, emergency rising. And there are ways that you can stop it. You can, if you're lucky at the beginning stages. If I'd have known what grounding was, I would have been able to ground my energy. The young man, in all honesty, Paul, did ask me if I knew how to ground my energy, and I thought he was just talking about yoga. I didn't have a clue what grounding was. Grounding is a way of keeping your energy in the body, and kind of very earthbound. You sort of makes you more physical. You feel more physical, if you will, but it stabilizes your energy and you can get control of it. But in this moment, I misunderstood what he was saying to me. We were talking at two different levels. I wasn't spiritual. I didn't have a clue what he was talking about. And so we had this crazy misunderstanding, which I think was supposed to happen, because perhaps if I had known, I would never have had this moment that changed my life forever. And from the moment it happened, and I saw my grandfather, who'd been dead 11 years, from that moment onwards, I was like, wow, what is this? And so first of all, actually, Paul, I went to learn to close down. I got on the internet, I did a lot of research, found the Spiritual Association of Great Britain. I asked to go to see I asked for their 2 best mediums. I was given 2 names. And I asked if I could see them. I didn't tell them anything about myself. I took the postcards in my bag. And as I sat down, the first gentleman that I saw said to me, do you have the black and white postcards? I said, I do. He said, can I have the one with the bridge on it? And I said, I will give you that. I went into my bag. I gave him the postcard with the bridge on it, and he gave me this most amazing reading. And then he said to me, I'm really sorry, but the spirit world are telling me that I can't give you all the information that they want to share. They want you to go to another medium who I know but won't be visiting London for 6 weeks. Can I refer you to this person? And I said, yeah, sure. And so I went to see them 6 weeks later, and then it was really profound. And he said, your life's going to change completely. You will eventually become a medium and an ambassador for the spirit world. And I didn't know what he was talking about. Who kind of laughed at him. And it's kind of ironic sitting here in front of you now, 11 years later or 15 years later, whatever it is. It's more than that actually. But I don't keep track of time. But yeah, just to discover and find out that what he said was true, absolutely true. At the time, I thought he was crazy. I was very happy in the fashion industry, and I didn't see myself having a career outside of that. And actually, I didn't actually look to leave the fashion industry until Spirit said to me, "It's time." And I said, "What do you mean it's time?" And they said, "Well, we've got they clearly knew COVID was coming fall. I didn't, as many other people didn't." And they were preparing for it, and they said, "Well, we've got you a new job." I said, "What do you mean you've got me a new job? You're gonna work for the spirit world." And they said, "We need you to leave your job. We need you to leave it now." And that was quite a big ask, because I was on a 6-digit salary, Paul. I wasn't in a small role. I was an executive at the top of my game in leadership, and I walked away with nothing to go to. I did exactly what they asked me to do, and not knowing whether. I knew that maybe I could take a gap year and go back into the role at a later stage. Of course, I wasn't throwing my experience away, but it was a big sort of ask to kind of walk away and for nothing, not knowing if there was going to be a career in front of me. But that's what I did. And
yeah, so that was such a scary moment to give that up, and to go
I was threatened. I won't say that I took it lightly. I was very, very nervous about it. And I did some really humble things in that time as well, Paul. So I went from this executive who was in board meetings, like reporting into the board, to literally sitting in a village hall, talking to complete strangers, doing readings for free. And, just to get experience. And I kind of followed the breadcrumbs of what Spirit gave me. So if they gave me an opportunity, I said, for the first year, I said yes to everything. And then started to show me and decipher, as many people do as they go on the route. And it was really humbling. It was very different. And I just felt my way. But about 6 months later, they said to me, turn on your laptop, contact this gentleman called Mark Island. And I got an email address, and I emailed this gentleman thinking, this is the craziest thing I have ever done in my life. But I'd gone so far, Paul. I was like, well, I've gone this far and might as well go the whole hog, because at the end of the day, the worst thing that's going to happen is I'm going back to the fashion industry next week. And if this is the pivotal moment, then so be it. And I contacted Mark. Unfortunately for me, his father was and one of my guides as well, which is really beautiful. His father was actually my guide, one of my guides, and he was introducing me to him. And his son had an awareness of mediumship and said, I think I know why you've been sent to me. And he said, I'd like to do some blind tests with you. Would you be willing? And so at the time, Paul, I wasn't a medium. I wasn't a professional medium. But I agreed to do these tests because I thought, well, then I'll understand if I've got a quality to my mediumship that's worth pursuing, And so these tests was a bit of an experiment, really. And something in the back of my head sort of said, you're going to pass them, but I didn't know. I'll be honest, I went in very open-minded. And, some of the people that I was up against had 30 years experience of being mediums.
Wow.
So I was very much a novice. So what you do in a blind test is he would give me a day at a time, and I would just get a blank screen. I read for 6 people. They just gave me yes, no, maybe, don't know. And then at the end of it, he came back with they score you, and if you get very accurate individual information, they give you bonus points, and they score you basically out of this, and give you a percentage. And the pass rate was in the, I think it's above chance, it's about 60 or 70%. And for me, I was very fortunate. I ended up in Mark's top percentile of scores, and so he said, you've passed. And that was really the start of my career. And from that point onwards, some of the people that I'd read for in the trials then referred friends, because two of them had scored me 100%, and one of them had had an astounding reading. Their son had passed in very tragic circumstances, and the information that I'd given was so accurate, they were gobsmacked. So they were American, this couple, but their son had gone missing in Europe, and the details were very validating to them. So they naturally, word of mouth, few people started to come through the door asking if they could have a reading, and then from there it just escalated. And I'll be honest, a bit like yourself, Paul, I don't really advertise. I do the odd demonstration myself, as you do online. But word of mouth just literally took it formed a career. And I just trust, really, I trust that Spirit will send me who I'm supposed to read for. And I kind of find that actually a nicer way to read, because energetically you know that the majority of people that are sent to you, you're going to vibrate with and be able to offer a great reading. There are some people that I can't read for. I feel very heartbroken when that happens. But again, I trust that the spirit world, there's everything's divinely timed, Paul, and maybe they just refer them on to somebody like yourself, or another colleague. Usually I get a gut feeling as to where to direct somebody, and that's how it is. Just very, very.
Absolutely. And your whole story about how you become into mediumship, it's an amazing story. It's an amazing journey. And we've been interviewing mediums over the last couple of years since COVID, and a lot of people's personal stories, they normally lose someone dear to them, but you've gone headlong into this. You've kind of been catapulted from a very mainstream corporate world into mediumship. That's such a difficult transition for anyone to take on board. The other thing you're really quite passionate about is working with grief, aren't you? Working on the grief.
Yeah.
Because you're the co-founder of Transcend. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I'm really quite passionate. We don't do enough with grief in terms of mediumship, or we understand enough.
I don't know about you, Paul, but when I was learning about mediumship, nobody told me about grief. It never even occurred to me that I would be reading. I know that sounds really weird, doesn't it? It never even occurred to me, because you're changing psychic skills as well as mediumship. When you start out, you just have this presumption that, I don't know, I just don't know what I thought. I think I was so curious in my investigation, wanting to understand what had happened to me, that maybe my driving force was a little bit different, or my radar was somewhere else. But it never really occurred to me about grief connected to death or readings. And it is quite an experience, isn't it? Because everybody grieves differently. And I wouldn't say that there's stages to it. I think different people react differently, but there are certainly some themes that arise, and that can be anything from anger, frustration, numbness, feeling disassociated, reprioritizing of priorities, change and shift. So one of my friends, who was a psychologist, suddenly found that she couldn't be a psychologist anymore, because the people presenting their problems in front of her didn't seem significant compared to the loss that she just experienced to the child. And so we get these big shifts that happen through grief. And, the early stages can be quite challenging for some people. And, some people find that they go really well through the first year of shock and grief. And then by year 2 or 3 start to crash. So it is very, very different. And I guess what happened is my background I educated myself like you did, Paul, as soon as I started to work in this industry, and I started to get, I was a clinical hypnotherapist, because that was the other thing that had happened to me in the diving accident. Is the one thing that helped me with my shock was to kind of face up to what happened in the accident was hypnotherapy. So I'd got curious about a lot of things, and I can see now that Spirit had actually trained me in a lot of healing modalities before I even became a medium. And so automatically that opened up, and I started to see parallels and themes, and I realized that I had the skill set to be able to use cognitive behavior therapy and hypnotherapy to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, and which, sadly for some people who experience the loss of a partner or child, or even parent, if you've been very, very close and looking after that parent, they sometimes have post-traumatic stress disorder or depression. They might suffer insomnia. They might have panic attacks. The whole world of their nervous system has received a shock, and it responds, and the body responds to that shock. And so I started using the healing modalities, Paul, and then I met some really interesting people who had gone themselves on the grief journey. And one of those happened to be a lady called Paige Lee, who's a grief educator in the USA and has written a book. She's an author of a book called Choose to Believe. And I actually interviewed Paige, for Helping Parents Heal. I was an affiliate leader for Helping Parents Heal in the UK for 5 years. And I did voluntary work, just helping people with grief. And I guess that's where my desire to support originated from. And Helping Parents Heal is a fantastic organisation that deals with the loss of children. Parents have lost children, but I was finding that I was meeting widows, people that lost parents, siblings, and they needed the same information, and I had nowhere to direct them to. So what happened is, through a conversation with Paige, is that we decided, first of all, we were just going to do a retreat and invite people from all walks of life that had experienced grief to come together. And what happened was that we ended up doing a Facebook page and actually doing voluntary work online. And it kind of transcended from there. And so Transcending Grief is a Facebook page. We don't have a website or anything, Paul, because we don't want to pay for the administration. We want to keep costs to the absolute minimum so that we can, and also we don't want the bureaucracy. We want to spend time with the people who need help and don't want to be like tied into doing all the paperwork and stuff. We are just working on a voluntary capacity. But within the group, we've got psychologists, we've got healers, we've got grief educators, we've got people that have got skill sets from lots of backgrounds. We've also got some medical doctors in there and psychologists as well. So there generally tends to be somebody that we can, buddy somebody up with or kind of introduce them to. We've got some chat groups that go on. There's Reiki shares that go on. There's mediumship demonstrations that happen. We try to mix it up, and we get speakers on, and kind of, even some of our members have got really fascinating stories, and we just invite them to kind of talk as well. We've had some authors come on, and we've done some book clubs. So, yeah, I'm trying to do.
Sorry, is that a Facebook group then?
Yeah, it's a Facebook group. So if you search in Facebook for Transcending Grief, you'll be able to join the page, and it's open to anybody that suffered with grief and needs some support. And we take on board, we'd listen to what you've got to say. There's gatherings with, we've got 3 other members that really support Paige and I, that run other groups. Actually, they've got their own groups, but we come together quarterly with Bobby, Beth and Raina to do a bigger sort of free demonstration of all sorts of different, we set a theme for a month and we explore it. So we welcome feedback from the audience as well.
Well, what we'll do is we'll put a link in, guys, so you can get to see that and connect on that, because that's fantastic work, and that is something I wish I'd been taught more about when I first started to develop, was the impacts that our messages can have on someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And positive and negative. Sometimes people are so shocked by what we are able to convey that it can take them a little while to kind of absorb it, whereas other people, it can transform somebody. I had a lady, Paul, who'd been 10 years in conventional healing. She'd been to the doctor, she'd done the medical processes, she'd done all the counselling. And she came for a mediumship reading. She was really skeptical and she was a little bit scared, nervous. She'd come from a church background and was a bit anxious about the presumptions that people, the misconceptions that were out there. And, she said to me, it's the first night in 10 years, Kat, that I actually slept through the night. I didn't have a panic attack. I've gone without a panic attack now for a week. I feel comforted that my son is alive and that he's okay. And the evidence could only come from him. So I feel relieved. And so what you find is, and I think this is where you and I tend to come from in terms of mediumship, it's a great healing modality if it's used effectively and well. And it can transform somebody's life. And if it means that they sleep better, they don't have a panic attack, their insomnia reduces, they feel less anxiety, less fearful, then there's something positive to be said for that. And I think that's important.
So another question we've had here, do you think mediumship could play an even bigger role in the grieving and healing process?
Yeah, I do, Paul. I think that's part of our role as ambassadors for the spirit world that we've got to get across, because I think, unfortunately, particularly in the UK, actually, because I think our history, of burning people at the stake and kind of torturing anybody that's seemed to be different, and, if we go back down the centuries, we find that there's a lot of fear connected to what we do and misconceptions. And, a lot of people talk about fraud or charlatans, and we could say that you actually find that in every industry, in banking industry, other industries, there are all going to be people that abuse situations or look at them in a different way. And, so we're up against these kind of commentaries sometimes, sadly. And I think to those people, I'd say, if you could meet some of the community that have had complete transformations and been able to transcend their grief and actually cope and get through their day when they haven't been able to do that previously to a reading, then we've got to say that there's something, we've got to open it up and say there's something very positive about that. And if it makes the difference to one person, then why should we deny it to that person? I really do believe that mediumship is part of our normal everyday experience. One of the other things that I do a great deal of work on is teaching other people to connect to themselves, because I don't just want you to be dependent on a medium. I want you to have some great experiences, and then I want you to learn to connect yourself. And once you to experience it for yourself, you suddenly realize that this is not a gift. It's part of the human psyche and part of our normal capacity as human beings. And so we're probably not tapping into a very high percentage of what we're capable of doing, Paul. I don't know if you agree with that.
Totally agree. And it's only recently that I've become aware it's a very natural process, and it's a natural process for us all, whether it's a more or lesser degree, whether you're going to be working as a medium or, even whatever your modality. I do think having that connection and that having that process, working with that process, it just opens your awareness to so much more. So I do think it's a very natural process.
Yeah, you've tapped on something really positive there as well, because I'd say that connection you don't have to be a medium or want to connect with loved ones in the spirit world to create a good connection. What you can do is you can develop your connection with spirit and yourself, your own soul, and the environment around you, and you can grow your intuition. And when that happens, some really amazing things happen as well, Paul, because there's been certain decisions that I've completely changed and gone against the grain for. Even when I was in the fashion industry, I was offered, contractually some very optimistic opportunities. And I would go into my intuition and the spirit world would go, no, that deal will never pay out, Kat. You watch. Say no to it and watch what happens. And the person that offered me, it was very angry, but it's going to pay out X amount of money, you make all this money. I was like, no, I won't. I'll end up working 15, 20 hours extra a week, and I won't earn anything from this project. And I was right. A lot of people signed that contract and they've never paid out. And so I think intuition could be, I've got another really good example of that as well, where in my team, in my everyday work, you know, Spirit said to me that that young lady that's working with you, she's going to move to Hong Kong in 6 months' time. And if you focus your time on succession management with the person underneath her, as opposed to putting all your efforts into training her, you will find that you'll be able to increase morale in your team because you'll be able to succession management that person into that role. And 6 months later, that's exactly what happened. This girl was very happy in our team in the UK. And suddenly she met somebody and she decided to move to Hong Kong. And when it made me smile, I just was kind of like, oh my God, I could have spent 6 months putting all my effort into her. And then she exited, but I didn't. I did what Spirit asked me to do. And again, this intelligence proved right. So I think actually there's a bigger picture here, Paul. I think
agree.
our intuition, we can be commercially more successful. And maybe that's why they put me in the fashion industry before they made me a medium. Because in terms of my experience with playing with this before I became a medium, I found it made extraordinary benefits to my everyday life. I've also seen the spirit will step in to protect me in certain situations as well, when I've maybe had not had my eye on the game and felt a bit vulnerable, and they've said, oh, you know, just need to warn you that that person that you're operating with is not who they pretend to be. And when I checked them out, they're correct. So, you know, and that saved me from having dealings with somebody disparate, you know, that could have affected my career or my life in a negative way. They may not have done, but they forewarned me, and I think that they forewarned me for a reason. So I've seen all these kind of things all come into play, and I think actually developing our ability with the spirit world is far broader than mediumship or healing. It's about a better connection with ourselves, self-development, understanding ourselves better. It's about a greater awareness intuitively of our health. What's right for us might not be right for our neighbour in terms of decisions, so we can make better, effective decisions, and we may actually navigate more towards our soul's purpose and be more happy in life because we're more fulfilled and we're more comfortable with the balance that we create in life. And I think, you know, that's maybe one of my learnings from the corporate world is I love the corporate world dearly, but some areas of it do drive people very hard, you know, work very long hours, a very fast pace. If you can make decisions quicker, more effectively and smarter as a result of expanding your intuition, then hey presto, we get a better balanced life, a better, less stress in the workplace, we get you know, more effective production and people, and we get happier people who are more passionate about what they do, and they're working in a happy environment with happy people around them. They're going to naturally be more successful because they love what they do and they love the environment they're in, and that's what we see in industry. So yeah, it can change things.
Yeah, absolutely. It helps us to reach our highest potential. Absolutely.
So that's perfect for it, Paul.
Yeah, I which now brings me on nicely because a couple of the things we've been talking about, we kind of touched on guides there. You know, guides helping us to move forward, not to make the right or wrong decisions. In your experience, I mean, when was the first experience you had of meeting your guides, or you was aware of?
Oh, I got it awfully wrong at the beginning, Paul. You did, but I sat there. My first experience, guys, I remember it very clearly. I was sat at this spiritual associate from Great Britain with this lovely man called Terry Tasker, who, gosh, he must have been in his 70s or 80s then, but he was just a joy. I don't know if you ever came across him, Paul, but he was so lovely. He was a healer, really, but he was amazing physical medium as well. And I seen him transfigure and everything, and it was. He came up to me and he gave me the name of one of my guides, and he started talking about this guide, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have a clue what you're talking about. And he explained it to me. He explained that there were people in the spirit world that had, you know, navigated towards me to work with me different reasons. There may be one that was with me from my birth, but there were several that would come in to work with me at different levels of my life to do different things with me. And he talked very passionately, and I have to be honest, I left that day thinking, we'll see. But this lady came up to me and she gave me a book. And I was like, I looked in the book and it had the name that he'd given me on the book. And I was like, oh. So my first experience was actually being told about a guide and then being given a validational sign that what was given was kind of true in the physical world. Then I started experiencing and sitting and writing, and I would get some really lovely channelings actually. And I would call this guide by the name that I'd been given, but to be fairness, there was a lot of situations where I was aware that it wasn't this guide that had been named to me, and I didn't really bother about a name too much at the beginning, Paul. I just allowed spirit to work with me freely, and to them, I don't think names are that important actually. But so I worked for a long time just actually calling it my guide team or asking for guides to set forward, not knowing who they were. And then something brilliant happened actually. When after the diving accident, when I trained in clinical hypnotherapy, a friend of mine who'd always had a healing aptitude, she's always had really hot hands and amazing healing abilities when she used her hands for healing. And she lost her father. She'd had a bit of a scary experience where she was sat with her brother in a car and the car actually started shaking. And she knew it was her father from spirit, but it was so physical, it scared her and it stopped her sleeping at night. And her brother was a bit shaken by it as well. And she was aware that I was doing clinical hypnotherapy. And she said, could I be one of your students? Could you practice on me? Because I'm really struggling with like anxiety around the loss of my father. And I said, sure, yeah, come around to the house and I'll practice. That's ideal for me because I've been looking for candidates to practice on. And we did a hypnotherapy session with her, which went very, very well. But because she was so open to spirit, even though she wasn't a medium or having development herself, she suddenly my guides transed in to the end of her hypnotherapy session. It's very unusual. It's only happened to me on 2 occasions, and this was one of them. And they literally came through, and she said, "I've got a doctor here. He says his name's Dr. Mason. And he's saying you didn't take the train that he asked you to take to Bournemouth. You need to see this woman." And she gave me this name of this woman, and he needs you to go there for a soul reading. And I started to laugh. And I was like, and she said, "Who's Ben?" I said, "Oh, that's a friend of mine," but this friend never knew that person. And she gave me this sort of validation of her information, and I brought her out of the trance. And I said to her, "Can I just ask you, do you remember anything at the end of your trance session today?" And she said, "Yeah." "Who's Dr. Mason?" She said, "You've got to get that train." And I said, I was at a party in Pimlico and somebody gave me a card and asked me to go see this woman, but she had a stage name. And they asked me to go for a soul reading. And this man had told me that the Archangel Michael wants you to go to Bournemouth. And I laughed, but I took the card and I put it in my back pocket, and I had a very interesting conversation with him. But 3 months went by, Paul, I forgot about it. I left this card in the back of my jean pocket. I just ignored it. And his name was Ben. And so in this moment, I said to him, "Come on, help me, pull out this drawer." One of these jeans has got a card in the back pocket. Let's check where she's from. Because I thought in my head it was Brighton, but when we got the card out, it was correct. It was Bournemouth. And so we pulled out this card and I was like, "Oh my God, I'm going to have to go see this woman." So for a long time, Paul, I called my guide Dr. Mason, but his real name was something else. He was a doctor and he was a Mason, but that wasn't his name. So you get these comical moments, don't you? And it was only really when I started being a professional medium that they actually came forward and gave me their real name. So and then weren't, Native American names. They were very normal, everyday guy down your street name, that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
interesting.
absolutely. So, do you know all of your guides who you work with? Is there specific guides for specific?
I do, Paul. I have several specific ones where I do know their names and I work with them regularly. But
Yeah.
there are still times where there is an energy that works that I don't always know, which one's working. And sometimes actually, because I do, we would, in terms of trance, sometimes when I'm trance channeling, or if I sometimes sing, it sounds really weird. I'm not a singer, but sometimes when I go into trance, it almost evidentially to prove to me that spirit can do things that I physically can't do in my everyday life. They will sing and use sound frequencies to create energy shifts, both in myself, sometimes to cleanse my own energy, but also sometimes to send it out to the environment or the healing to other people, because sound can be very powerful at moving energy and creating shifts. And I think there's some research coming out of America at the moment where they've been using light and sound, and they're finding that it does create both physical changes as well as emotional ones in the human body. So I started experimenting with this sound that would be trance, and what I've noticed is when I demonstrate it, sometimes it'll be one person that will come in and they'll stay with me the whole time, and it'll just be their voice. But I've noticed that sometimes it can be 6 or 7 different voices at the same time, or at least the audience will feedback it felt like 6 or 7 people. And then one of my friends actually tried to identify how many times the energy shifted, and he counted 20 different shifts in energy of people coming through where they were blending and harmonizing their energy pool. So I think there are times, if I'm really honest, I think this is true of most mediums, if I'm fair, that you don't always know which one's operating with you at the exact time. There may be a whole, charade of people there. There are other times where I specifically very much know who they are.
Yeah.
And I've been very fortunate to hear, Mark's father, Richard Island, and a few other people. One of my guides called Arthur will come through and they will speak very directly to me. And then I do have experiences as well with the angelic realm as well. I do hear, I feel very different when I get a higher vibrational field coming forward and directing their energy towards me. I normally recognize those. So yeah, is that similar to your experience, Paul?
You're very lucky in terms of working with the angelics. I'm very curious with the angels, and I'm a very logical thinking guy. So I came into mediumship. It was quite difficult for me because I had that duality, push pull against each other. But I've had a couple of experiences with the angels. But normally when I'm working around situations like, for instance, when I bring through children to parents, that I find the angelics help me with that. I become very aware, and there's a subtle difference in the information I'm giving.
I
Yeah,
find
it's
I feel the energy differently as well. I don't know if you do that. So there is a difference to the energy, but where they
yeah,
operate and they touch my own brain or mind is different. I get a funny feeling on the left side of my head when the higher vibrational fields come in, and sometimes it's like a pressure point. And I could ask them to take it away, but I like it there because it's kind of a nice thing to go, oh,
it's
my sign, you're coming in at a different level.
absolutely. And I wanted to touch on trance as well, because you do trance, but you also do something that a lot of mediums don't do. Most mediums tend to just work on bringing their guides through to bring philosophy, which is wonderful. But you've gone that step further where you bring through the person's loved ones. That's quite
Yeah.
rare, isn't it?
Do you know what? I don't know if I knew it was rare, Paul. I never. So I taught myself trance initially before I actually did training at Finley College. I because I was a clinical hypnotherapist, I just started to experiment, and I found that I was naturally susceptible to trance, and I could go into trance very easily. In fact, I realised that as I was younger, even before the diving accident, when I had moments of intuition, that I would always be a bit of a daydreamer or somebody that would always shift awareness. And we do go into trance states 8 to 10 times an hour, believe it or not, when we're, processing thoughts or accessing information. And so I started experimenting. I started experimenting really because one of my friends had died, and I was asking him, can you come closer? Can I physically feel you? I wanted to understand. Can you move my hand? Can you make a sensation that's not me? And so it started with this game, if you will, with a friend of mine that had died, like wanting to see how far he could go. And suddenly I started to get waves of information and difference. So I started to play with it first of all with my friends and people that I knew, and then I would, when I had the opening of the throat in India, when they opened up the Kundalini stage 2, I got these sounds that came out, and that's really when I started doing trance seriously, and it started shifting my energy. And so I did spirit kind of duped me. I did a demonstration in East London, and one of the ladies said, I'd heard that you're a trance medium. And I said, oh, yeah, I am, kind of, not very often frequent, but yeah, how can I help you? And she said, well, I think we've got, the 11 of us that sit in trance, but we've stopped this circle because something scared us. We've got this hall and we think it's haunted. And we need somebody to come and have a look. Would you come and have a look? And I said, oh, this is kind of a bit out of my field. I don't, necessarily believe in haunteds. But out of curiosity, because I'm local, I'm kind of keen to come along and have a look. Now, when I got to this hall, I couldn't identify any negative energy, but they kept saying it's over there, it's in that corner. And this will appeal to people because this is where the logical mind is really important. And we've got to rule out everything first before we resume the spirit world. And in this moment, the energy, I couldn't identify anything, but I said, I'll sit for you in trance and we'll get spirit to do something. And actually, I heard the spirit world say, you're going to have to do sound healing and sing because they need to see something physical. Their actual mind framework is so strongly attuned to this concept or idea that there is a haunting, that it won't break unless we do something. So the sound would create a difference in the energy anyway, but there was 2 levels to it. There was a psychological level, and then there was the physical level of changing the energy. I did a meditation, I did the sound healing, and then the spirit world started channeling and talking. And what happened next was really how it started, Paul. The spirit guide turned to the right and individually read for each of the 11 mediums in the room, only one of which I'd ever actually met before. And they gave them individual readings, and we sat there for 2 hours. When I came out, my face was on fire. The guy in front of me said it's one of only a couple of occasions where I actually transfigured. And it's different to overshadowing. My whole face, you could have fried an egg on it. It was red hot, and it was soft, actually. I said to people, look, feel my face. And people were like, oh my God, it's so hot. And I was like, yeah, and look how shiny the skin is. Like, there was an audible difference. And I felt a bit high as a kite, actually. It's really important to kind of ground yourself in these things, or get a cup of tea, or kind of bring yourself back down. I didn't necessarily do it properly when I first started, Paul, and that's how it started. And then they invited me back saying, oh my God, we had such a great time, we'd like you to come back. And I thought it was to do mental mediumship, and they've got this audience, and it was to do trance. So I kind of threw myself into the deep end, Paul, and I just thought I'd go for it. And so I asked them to put blindfold on me, and I started reading in trance for individuals, and it worked nicely. But you get information in trance that's very different to mental mediumship, because the spirit world have a little bit more control. And so sometimes they'll say things that you as a medium might feel is not appropriate, or kind of goes a little bit too far. High level of trust involved, Paul.
Absolutely. One of the things I was going to talk about as well, as a medium, I'm very much aware, and I'm sure you are, but the joy and but also the lovely sense of humor they have on that side.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Really, some of them have a real dry sense of humor. Just say it as it is. It does make me laugh, and expressing that across. But is there any funny stories that you have with some of the contacts and connections you brought through from the spirit
Oh,
world?
God, yeah, there are. The one that really stands out to me, or which I kind of mentioned to you off camera, was we were doing a trans demonstration, and for a group of parents that had lost children, and I had a blindfold on, and actually my page was actually saying yes, no on their behalf. They were just putting a thumbs up or thumbs down, so that I couldn't even hear their voice. And so I had no idea. I would, when we identified who was getting the reading, they would sit in the empty chair next to me. But because I was blindfolded, I didn't know who was sat in the chair. But I just remember having this moment where the boy in spirit was so, big personality, Paul, and said things very sort of how it was, swore a lot more than I would do. I would edit out some of the F words and stuff like that because I'm typically very English and polite. And this boy was a little bit braver and more kind of confident than me, Paul, and a bit more brassy in fairness. And he was always taking the mick out of his mum. And I won't mention the lady's name because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but she just bought a razor. She had darker hair, and as she got older, she found that the hair was getting sort of more dense, and so she bought herself one of these razors where you shave off your hair. But her son was like laughing, going, "Mum, what are you doing? I've seen you shaving your arms." And he said, "You keep missing lines. I've seen you get to work and you've got a line of hair where you haven't shaved it." And at one point he was laughing so much, and I could hear my best friend in spirit. I could hear him laughing, and they were laughing so much it nearly brought me out of trance because it's weird. I'm not. I have an awareness of what's going on, but I'm still there. I'm trying to stay in the trance, but I was laughing so hard with them, not at her, but with them, because they were so hilarious, and they were, he really egged it on, and the more that he got laughter from the audience, the further it went. And I was thinking to myself, I'm scared, Paul. I'm scared that when I come out of trance, whoever's in this chair is going to kill me. They're going to, and I just didn't know. I was a bit nervous. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I came out, and fortunately for me, this lady is absolutely salt of the earth. She's so beautiful, and her son is so hilarious. And she said, "I know it's him." No, it's him because that's exciting. What he used to be like in life. He used to take the mick out of me so badly. And she was like, "Oh, he hasn't changed." And you get this great sort of sense of humour and camaraderie, Paul, and it can be funny. It can be very, very funny.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was something else I wanted to touch on as well. I know your time is limited. I'm so sorry. I'm glad you're here because you've got so much knowledge to share. But I wanted to ask you also your take on, because I believe in an interview you did recently, you touched on soul planning.
Yes.
Interesting concept, because further on from that, now, do you? It's a hard one to ask this, and I really don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm just going to get. Do you feel suicide could be a part of that soul plan, or is it an instant decision made in that moment?
Ooh, that's really interesting. When I first started working in America, I didn't believe in soul planning. I hadn't heard of it. It's something that's never talked about or trained, is it? And I believed in certain milestones because I'd had certain experiences myself. Where people had said to me, "You're going to be, going to meet somebody, and you're going to end up living on this street in London." I did end up living on the street with my now husband, but it was a completely different set of circumstances to what the person had said. So I thought, oh, maybe there are milestones in life that you're always meant to get to.
Yeah.
And I was open-minded, and I didn't really know much about soul planning. But when people started asking me in interviews about soul planning, I said to them, I'm really on the fence about it until the spirit will teach me and tell me directly about soul planning. I don't really want to make a comment on it because I don't think I've got enough knowledge. And so I waited, and I asked the spirit world, come and share it with me. And actually more controversial than suicide is murder. And so I said to them, can you send me evidence? Because I don't want to be saying anything, that can't be backed up or kind of reviewed in different ways. And so it's really interesting. I don't know if we can back it up to a certain degree. There has been some great work done by Robert Schwartz. I really recommend you talking to him, actually, Paul. I'll introduce you. Paul wrote the book My Soul's Plan, My Soul's Gift, and he's an expert on his take on suicide and murder is probably the best you're going to hear, Paul. So I recommend maybe getting him on and hearing his take on it, because he's fabulous. But my experience through Spirit was that they said that we do lay out a soul plan, and we may vibrationally make shifts as we go through life, energetically, just like you would in any other strategy. You might decide that actually you've accomplished something a lot quicker than you thought you would, so you can fast track certain things. You might adapt it. And I think maybe that's what we're doing in our sleep a little bit, is actually making changes or kind of communicating with one another in our soul group and sort of making shifts. So the first thing that started happening is people would start to come for readings and they'd say strange things. So I had a week where people had died in accidents. It was like, there was a theme to the week. There was a girl that died in a car accident, and she said to me in a reading, Kat, I know that you're wanting to know about soul planning, and so here's the thing: 6 weeks before I died in a random car accident, which I had no awareness of in my physical, I completely, as an untidy and unclean, I think she said to me, I'm not unclean, but I was a very messy girl, reorganized everything, almost like you're nesting when you're having a baby. She literally formed her bedroom, she labels everything, she organized everything, Paul. And then 6 weeks later, she exits in a accident. And then a gentleman comes along, very next reading, and he says, I was young, athletic. He just got married. He had a baby. He'd been running every day, and that day he had a heart attack when he was out running, and he explained what had happened to him. But he said, the weird thing is, Kenneth, about 6 weeks before I died, I rearranged the whole of my loft and I tidied everything. So it was almost like they were packing, or going somewhere. So I found that's really interesting. And if you look at people who die naturally in later years, you find that sometimes there's these things where they talk about packing or going somewhere or wanting to go on travels. So I found it very interesting, Paul. And then I had a young boy who died in an accident, and he said, I said to my parents 3 weeks before I was going to die that I would go out in an accident. I would go out sideways with a smile on my face. I'd be the passenger in the car. He was the passenger in the car. It wasn't a country road, as he said to them. The car did go out sideways. I can't say that he was found with a smile on his face. I don't know that they have an awareness of that, but I found it fascinating that he brought up details. Then a child comes who has been murdered. Now, this is really controversial, Paul, but this child then says to me, Kat, I understand that I've been sent to you because you wanted to know about murder. You wanted to know whether murder was soul planned. And she said, all I can share with you is that from a very young age, I had some very strange experiences. I would share with my mother, I would say to my mother, I will never get beyond this age. This is what you're to wear at my funeral. She always had paranoias about keys fitting into locks. And on the night in question, a key didn't fit into a lock. She would tell her mum that spirit were visiting her the year prior to her exiting, preparing her and supporting her. It goes even further than that. She would say to her flatmates that she wouldn't be there the following Monday, but she didn't know why. She just knew that something was going to happen. And she gave a lot of details, Paul, that was so evidential, it kind of shocked me. And even the person that had murdered her, there was some really strange synchronicities with dates that connected to family birthdays and dates within their family. So there was some strange things. I can't say 100% is it soul planned, but the indication that she was trying to make was that there were patterns and behaviours of which she was aware of on some level at a soul level that perhaps the physical didn't know where she was, the direction was going, but her soul had great awareness of it. And so I found this kind of really fascinating. But what happens next is really amazing, Paul, because one of my friends in home was a nurse, and it's very rare that I'll get an angelic direction where I'm told that I have to share something with somebody that's predictive. But on this occasion, Archangel Michael asked me if I would contact a friend of mine who worked in a hospital as a nurse and share with her that he knew that she was miserable in her job, but there was an opportunity coming up in a neighbouring city where she would be able to go to work with a promotion above her ranking with all the criteria that she wanted, but the commute would be awful. And it was up to her whether she took the job, but that opportunity was there and it was going to be better than where she was at the moment. As it happened, a few weeks later, she took the job, Paul, and she moved to this city. And this city happened to be where this girl was murdered. And my friend was an oncology nurse, but she had mortuary experience. And during COVID, the hospital asked her to move to the mortuary. And in the time that she was in the mortuary, unbeknown to me, because I met this lady and her daughter completely separately, many miles away in the south of England, not the north from where I'm from, she had only one child that had been murdered in that area, and she'd looked after the body. And weirdly, the next time I would visit my friends, so bear in mind that I suggested that they take this role in this city prior to the event. So she's gone prior to the murder to this location, the only murder, and she didn't go as a mortuary nurse. She ends up in a mortuary and during COVID, and then I go to do a demonstration at a house when everybody leaves. I do voluntary demonstrations sometimes when I go to see some of my friends, and at the end of the night we have a glass of wine and we read for one another. I read for her, and she's I said, oh, this is weird. There's this young lady here who has nothing to do with you. She was murdered. And she says she knows you. She's come to say thank you. And she tells me the story of my friend looking after her in the mortuary. Now, Paul, this was a shock to me because I thought my friend was an oncology nurse. I didn't know she had worked in the mortuary. And I said, what's she talking about? And she said, yes, there was a child, and it was that girl. And I was the person that looked after her body during the forensic examinations. And so you see this amazing story unfold, Paul, that you have to say there must have been some degree of planning in that, because I directed her to that on behalf of Spirit to that hospital. That not only that, but young ladies, and her parent came to me as a +1. She asked to watch a reading that I was doing, and if she liked the reading, could she have a reading? I had no idea who she was, what background was. She'd not booked in. I agreed that she could have a reading. And so it seems random, but it's not, Paul. I think the spirit world orchestrate the appointments. I don't think we do. I think we think it's done on a physical level, but I don't think it is. I think we're operating on two different levels. And actually in that demonstration, when I was talking at East London, when I went to do that trance clearing that day, that was the first time I was aware of I'd been duped into going, because I could hear my guide teaching the guides on the spirit plane. At the same time, I was having the clearance and the talks and the readings on this level. And so there's a duality to life that I think we need to be more aware of. And I skirted a little bit. Do I believe that it's all planned? I think in some instances the potential is there, that it could be. I haven't got enough evidence to say yes or no yet, but I have seen some very interesting research coming out of America on people who have been looking into soul planning in a lot greater depth, and they have some very interesting information.
Yeah, it's certainly something to dig more deeply into.
Yeah.
On
What do you think?
that was amazing. Yeah, but on another level, it's you're also interwoven in you yourself. You're interwoven into that story as well. So on
Yeah,
that level,
I know.
as a part of learning for you as well about that connection, it's just amazing on so many different. It's so layered. It kind of begs a question: how much of our life is free will?
Yeah, so I think our attitude is free will. So I think the way that we approach something is free will. I do. It's an interesting one because I raised this to another expert on soul planning, Sarah Rubble. You might come across her as well. And Sarah's a lovely lady, but I said to her, I don't like this idea of not having free will. That's the bit that really, really gets to me because I've always thought I was a big decision maker, but if the things are already preempted, then what am I doing? And so we had a huge debate, actually, Sarah and I, at the beginning. I was like, I'm sitting on the fence with this soul planning, I'm not sure. And she had a really interesting take on it. She said, it is free will, but you decided it before you came here. It's just the timing of that free will is different. So your perception of free will is different. You have got free will. You've not agreed to do everything that you're doing. You've always had a choice in it, but that choice was made at a different time. I thought that was an interesting take, Paul. So your free will is there, but it's there's a different level to it. So I found that interesting that Robert's got a different perspective, Paul. He talks about sometimes vibrationally we can navigate towards opportunities or away from them. I certainly found that even my own experience of meeting Robert was an interesting one. As I say, I don't advertise what I do a great deal, except on my own social media pages and through talks that I do and podcasts and things. But I was doing my sound healing and I realized that this vibration has the spirit world trying to teach me about vibration. And I thought, I really need to talk to somebody who's an expert in soul planning, and it probably should be Robert Schwartz. I don't even know if I've shared this story with Robert. And I was doing the sound healing and I was thinking of him, and I wasn't asking to speak to him, I was just thinking of him. And the next thing I knew, as I came out of the trance, I heard one of my guys say, check your inbox. And when I went to my inbox, there was an email from Robert introducing himself. And I was like, oh, how has he got my email? Like, he's a really well-known author in the States. And I was like, how has he contacted me? I realized it was a sound frequency had got me on his wavelength. And, Robert will probably say otherwise. He'd probably say he was referred to, but it was the timing was so divine, Paul. It was crazy. And we ended up having a conversation and meeting, and I interviewed him on suicide, the exact subject that you'd asked for. And he gave the most amazing talk. But he talked about sometimes there are, the soul does find the plan more complicated and chooses to exit early because it can always repeat the experience in another incarnation or another way. If it feels that it's taken on too much, it has that free will to make a different decision. But then equally, he's got experiences that suggest that it could be soul planned in, and that experience is, so it's very fascinating subject, Paul. I don't know if I've got all the answers for you, but I certainly can refer you to some people that I've had interesting conversations with that could maybe take it a stage further for you in another talk.
We would love that, and our viewers would love that. And we'd like to get you back on, Kat, because there's so much we haven't asked you today. But well, we got two other questions we'd like to try and cram in as well. We'd like to ask you, okay, this is a big one. What are we not talking about within the world of mediumship that we should be talking about?
Okay, I think that's a great question. I think we need to talk about the breadth of what we limit the appeal of mediumship. I think we touched on it earlier when we talk about you can develop your skills. You don't have to be a medium to develop them. You could make better decisions and have a better life experience, be happier, healthier, more creative, for me, I think there's a very interesting thing about labeling. You know, somebody who talks about mediumship and channeling, they might get that, oh, that's woo woo, you know, or kind of, oh, that's a bit cranky. I don't believe in that. But if you're a singer songwriter and you channel a song, then we think it's really cool and it's very creative and it's very artistic. I think they're the same thing. It's labeled differently.
Yes, I think
So
it was Robbie Williams. Robbie Williams said that he channeled or he was inspired with angels. He
yeah,
was singing out of a pool. Now, if you try to write that song, it's never going to happen.
yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, we get a lot of poetry, don't we, when we channel, and we get loads of things that come down, but and we can draw and paint and all these kind of things as well. And I find it fascinating, Paul. I think the bigger picture of mediumship is that we've limited it to readings and other speculative things. And I think it's far, far broader than that. I think if we really learned how to connect, our whole way of living we'd be reaching our highest potentials in so many different levels, creatively, business wise, strategically. You know, I sometimes think, and I did used to joke with my brand director, that I was very successful at my job. And I said, I think it's my intuition and my gut instinct and my, you know, if a supplier was in trouble, spirit world would pick it up. You know? And so I'd say, I'm not going to put all my eggs in one basket this season. I'm going to move some business over here because I think my gut and my spirit team are saying that there's issues over there. And people would say to me, Debbie, sounds silly. They're an amazing supplier. They've been with us for years. I said, I know, I love them, but something tells me if I put all my money there, it's going to be trouble. And sure enough, there was. So I would use my intuition very successfully, or my spirit team work, in different ways, Paul. And so my experience is that maybe that's why I was thrown into this world, is to sort of shake it up and sort of say, I think there's a lot more potential to the skills that we use and having communication across the veil, and that it's got to be broader, and we've limited it. We've limited it through fear, because in the past people have been scared about power issues, or people having an awareness that makes them less liable to the industry in a way, because it makes them more able to make different choices when we want people to stay in group mentality. But I think we've got to get braver. I think the 21st century, we're about getting braver and realizing that we don't have to be competitive in the same way, that we all have different soul plans and soul purposes. And if we really were true and working and operating at our highest potential, aligned with this spirit and this soul, then we would run into less encounters that caused conflict and issues. The world would be a happier place. Would there be less conflict? We would perhaps be more compassionate, caring, and loving to individuals. We might, you know, create a happier place that's got less war and less political turmoil, because perhaps we'll be able to find the middle ground or the compromise more frequently, or to talk about, through the help of spirit, possibilities that perhaps we haven't even looked at. You know, I lived with doctors at university, and, you know, one thing we were talking about is like, you know, can spirit help do things to find cures, you know, COVID and different health regimes and things that would benefit. And we find that meditation and mindfulness and, you know, the learning about the activation of the vagal nerve, the nerve, all these kind of things can create opportunities that improve health. So we've seen it in the work of Ed Casey in the 1900s. We've seen that he make amazing, you know, I'm not a medical medium per se, but I've met some that are incredible people. And I would love to see a fusion where people come together from different guises even in an experimental way, to see if shifts could happen. I think there's just so much more growth if we're less fearful, and we don't put too much pressure on ourselves as well, that it is an experiment. We just want to find out what the true potential is, and if it creates opportunities that make for a better world, then hey, presto, bonus. You know, we're in a pretty bad state anyway. We might as well find out what, you know, unlimit and find out what the potential is.
Yeah, nothing to lose at all. Living in harmony. Amen to that. Thank you for that. Kat, one last thing. What's next for you?
What's next for me? I'm writing a book. The spirit world of inspired. It's about past lives. We'll have to have another conversation about past lives. I could tell a whole. It is actually about the subject of murder and soul planning, and it's about somebody that I met in the spirit world and what happened to them and how they influenced my world. Having, I'm a great believer that we make friends with spirit in the same way that we do people in the physical world. And so I became friends with this young man who I had other incarnations or experiences with, and I started to write a book with him. It started by doing some channeled short stories, and I gave them to his parents. His parents liked them, and I said, I think he wants to write a book together. They said, go for it. They'd actually been forewarned by a medium that a lady would come who would write a book or for this, and that it wouldn't be them that writes the book, and they agreed. And so I'm writing that book at the moment, Paul. So I hope to get my head down, because I don't know about you, but I get distracted very easily, and I need to put my head down and say no to a few things in order to kind of get this book done and finished, because I've been saying I'd be writing it for years. I've got 3 or 4 chapters into it now. I really want to get it finished by the end of the year. So I'm myself to do that. That's what I'd like to do next. And I've got some other opportunities coming up that I'll talk to you about maybe in the future, that I've just signed a contract on. So we'll see what happens.
Well, let us know towards the end of the year, and we'll get you back on, and we'll talk about past lives, and we can talk about the book.
Yes,
but
that would be
now,
amazing. Oh,
we love it. We love your energy is amazing, Kat, and thank you so much for sharing all your stories with us. We can't thank you enough.
Paul, it's been a pleasure. It's been lovely to work with you, and I hope you'll come on Transcending Grief for us at some point as well. We'll be able to inspire you.
All right.
Wonderful. Take care, my darling. Oh, thank you. Bye.